For this week, we're going to cover information processing theory and types of memory. And we've covered types of memory a little bit earlier in the semester, so you're going to see a connection there. But before we go too far, let me show you the connection just to do a quick review over the first half of the semester, because that's really what information processing does for us. It takes everything that we've learned all semester long up until this point and ties it in to one theory. So let's look at this chart real quick. So you've got social learning theory. We did that on week 2. And it is, how do we learn from others? How do we learn within a group? And it teaches different concepts on how you can be efficient at learning from other people. Mainly, you have to understand yourself and how you fit into a group, intrapersonal intelligence. And then you also have to understand how to interact within a group, so interpersonal. So that's also going to lead us over here to multiple intelligence. And that's really based on our preference. How do we like to receive information from the environment? So do we want it presented visually, auditory, a combination of visual, auditory? Do we want kinesthetic? That's what week 3 was about. And then we got to types of knowledge and Bloom's taxonomy, and that was really based on the content, based on the class that you were in. So whatever's presented to you, what should you focus on first? Well, in a history class, declarative knowledge is really important. If I were to take a class like that, that's the first thing I would focus on. I'm not saying other types of knowledge aren't important, but it would be my go-to. If I was in a skill-based class, I would go to the procedural knowledge first, and then I could learn other methods. But I want to be as efficient as possible taking new information in. And then last week we talked about experiential learning theory. It's not the only method of teaching, but that's really what we were talking about. What's your preferred method of teaching? How do you want to teach to other people, and how do you want to be taught to if you're learning information? All of those are methods of taking information and paying attention to it. So here we have information processing, and I kind of drew it out based on environmental information that comes in, and then we have to pay attention to that information. And the closer it is to our preference on how we like to receive the information, the easier it's going to be to get it over here to short-term memory and pay attention to it so that we can get it into short-term memory. Now, your short-term memory has limitations. So we can hold about 7 plus or minus 2 items, and we can hold that for about 20 seconds without repetition. Now, if we can get enough rehearsal or repetition at that information, we can get it over here to long-term memory. But number one, we have to pay attention to it. So that's why we've been spending so much time on these methods of paying attention to new and novel information, either from groups, from our preference on taking in environmental information, or based on the course that we're in, or based on the teaching method. What's going to help us pay attention to it? For me, when it comes to teaching style, I like experiential learning. For me, when it comes to learning style, I want visual, auditory, and kinesthetic information presented to me. For the course, if it's a skill-based course, I want to focus on the procedural knowledge. That's going to help me pay attention to that and be as efficient as possible to get it over into long-term memory. It's also going to help me rehearse it. And then once it's here, long-term memory is indefinite. As long as we don't suffer any damage or disease to areas of the brain that are responsible for that information, we should be able to retrieve it. So obviously, damage will have an effect and disease, but again, once it's there, it's permanently there. And we may have trouble retrieving it because it's been a while since we've established that neural connection, so it may not be as strong, but the information's in there somehow. We just got to retrieve it. If you've ever had a word that you knew, but you were having trouble thinking of it, that word is in long-term memory. You just haven't practiced it in a while, and you haven't retrieved it in a while, so therefore that neural connection to that memory has started to atrophy. But it's still there. All right, let's go into and spend more time on paying attention and how it was linked to the previous topics. Oops, let me go back up. So we have environmental information coming in, smell, touch, hearing, taste, sight. We pay attention to that either socially, learning in a social environment, through our learning style or multiple intelligences, types of knowledge, and that's going to help us get to the upper levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So types of knowledge would be more of the course that we're in. What type of knowledge would be most important to focus on first? And then how's that information presented to us, or how do we want to present it to others? That's our teaching method. So that's how it's connected to the first half of the course. Now, next class period, we're going to break long-term memory up into explicit and implicit, both terms you've heard before, but we're going to talk about how it's going to connect to the second half of the semester. And we're also going to talk about areas of the brain that these processes or memories are stored and where they happen at, so the anatomy of the brain. But for today's activity, we're going to be doing a pump drill. It's a fairly complicated activity, meaning it has more parts than some of the other activities, definitely than the fire roll. It may be equivalent to the bow drill, but a little bit more complicated. It takes some rhythm to do, so if that's not your preferred mode of learning, or you have trouble with rhythm, you may want a group member that has some rhythm to try this out, because you've got to get the timing correct. When you make your video about the activity, you're filming your attempts at making an ember, but you're talking about it in terms of information processing theory. What helped you pay attention? Did you have to learn socially? Was it your learning styles? Did that have the most impact? Was it the types of knowledge that you focused on? Did that have the most impact on your attempts at making an ember with the pump drill? Or was it the teaching method? Did you have to rely heavily on the teacher or other group members to teach this? That's what I want you to talk about when you make your video. The attention portion of information processing, because next class we're going to spend more time on the memory side of it. Right now I want to focus on attention, taking this information from the environment. What was most important? And it could be a combination of these two. Maybe it was experiential learning, but it was also social learning because you had to learn from your teacher, but your peers also helped you out. Maybe you just focused on the process, so that would be types of knowledge. And maybe the processes that you focused on were the kinesthetic and the visual information coming in. That would be learning styles. That's what you're mentioning in your subtitles, or if you're doing auditory narration, that's what you're talking about in the video.